Welcome to Chamber Chats, a weekly series by the West Monroe West Washita Chamber of Commerce highlighting our valued members. As always, find out more about the Chamber and our members online at westmonroechamber.org. And now, this week's episode of West Monroe West Washita Chamber Chats.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining us for another episode of West Monroe West Washita Chamber Chats, filmed here at Louisiana Delta Community College. Today we're so complimented to join with our member and great advisor to all things, Mr. Tom Malmay from Malmay and Associates. So thank you for joining us.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here, Chris.
So, Malmay and Associates, tell us, what do you do?
Yeah, well, let's start with how I got here, right?
Okay,
how did we get Malmay and Associates? Yeah. I served as the Civil Defense Director in the 1990s, and before that I served
for Washita Parish.
For Washita Parish, and before that I served in the United States Coast Guard. Yeah. After about 10 years, I went to private sector, and along came Hurricane Katrina, and began working out in South Louisiana after Hurricane Katrina with a company that was led by the former FEMA Director, James Lee Witt. Made quite a name for himself, did a lot of good work in the federal government under President Clinton.
Sure.
And so I worked, all across the United States, all across the Gulf Coast, traveling all through the 2000s, some of the biggest disasters we've had in our time. Yeah. The last big deployment I had would have been Hurricane Sandy up in New Jersey and New York. Yeah. And then moved back home for the birth of my grandson, and haven't left. I haven't left.
And we're proud that you're here.
Yeah, and then we had the 2016 flood.
Right.
And became involved with that in that work, and I still do occasional travel and work for FEMA. I've got something next month in Kentucky. It'll be virtual. Last month I did some recovery type work in Missouri. So I still maintain some work outside the community, but most of it is here. I stay pretty busy here. So
let's talk about our community for a second. And we've had several major floods in the last 30, 40 years here. But 2016 was different in a lot of ways. So tell us, reflect on that just a little bit.
Okay, well let's start with my involvement in the 2016 flood. Yeah. So it was a well forecast event. Now there are those that would argue about rainfall totals, but in general, there was a flood coming, sure. And you knew it some days out.
Right.
So I didn't have any qualms with that.
Right.
So the flood starts. The rain starts Tuesday, March 8th. I remember. Right. It's Tuesday, March 8th. The rain starts. We're a couple of days into it, and I get a call from our 911 director. He knew I'd moved back to West Monroe, and he said, "We're looking for a map of what's underwater." And I said, "Well, we're not through flooding. We're still going underwater. We got more rain coming." I said, "But how many 911 calls have we had?" He said, "Well, I think we just looked at that, and we had about 3,000. Wow. I said, "Well, we can take those 911 calls and start to tell a story with that."
Yeah.
As you're already thinking of what I did with that data. Yeah. So I mapped out the data, and as soon as I saw it, I knew.
Yeah.
I knew, and we weren't done flooding, but I already knew looking at that,
right,
that we had not seen this flood before.
Yeah.
And that would have been midweek, that week of that flood.
So at that moment, you're overlaying it over topography,
yeah,
and population density and all that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah. We'll mix it all together. That's the first. It's the first step. So I'd already pulled local storm report information from the National Weather Service. I've put that in there. But what I'm looking for is to tell the story of what's happened to us.
Right.
And so what I'm seeing is if I know a neighborhood that had 2 911 calls and I know the terrain there, I got an idea how much that neighborhood went underwater. But I'm looking at this and provided that back to Emergency Operations Center, and we knew this we had not seen this flood before. But I need to point out there was some other big data work going on at the same time by the United Way. The United Way has a protocol with their recovery where they open up a line and start taking calls from people that register with their damage. Now between the 911 calls and the data from 211, it told a powerful story. As a matter of fact, we received an expedited disaster declaration for that flood that Sunday, and the United Way played a big part in getting that declaration because of the quality of the data. There was no reason to go out and do house counts. You had it. People called in, talked about their damage, and they had it in a spreadsheet. So we were very fortunate. And I'll go ahead and I'll add this to it. We'll come back to this, but those two data sets, the 911 and the 211 data, to this day, we're still reaping benefits in making our project applications to illustrate and tell the story what happened to us.
Right.
It still has value. So the work that I do in these other communities, like in Missouri and Kentucky, I talk about that.
Right.
I talk about the process that what you did before the storm to get some static data sets, demographics, and that sort of thing, getting all that in place. Then when you have your event, you know you're going to make that request from your 911 center. You know you're going to work with United Way and collect the kind of data that they collect, and you're going to start to tell that story of what happened to your community, because what you want to do is if you've had that kind of damage, you want to trigger that disaster declaration.
All right. So we're going to stay out of politics, but we're going to say we have new leadership in our community in bunches of levels, and there's a new motivation to look at all aging infrastructure and take advantage of unprecedented funding. We have this data, as you've been mentioning. How do you help tell the story of what could have been done? How do you help tell the story and influence some of those decision makers to make better decisions for the future?
Okay, well, you've just said a whole lot. so first,
break it down.
Let's talk about the political landscape.
Okay.
If you look at the West Monroe City Council, if
Yes.
you look at the Monroe City Council,
Yeah.
if you look at the police jury, then you look at OCOG. Clearly, we're starting to reflect the community. We are clearly a melting pot.
Right.
We have changed. We are not the same community we were just a few years ago.
Certainly.
Okay, it has absolutely changed. And Shane Smiley, Mayor Mitchell, Mayor Ellis, you can see the change. You can see the change all around us. And I got to tell you, when I moved back here, I had a purpose. It was my grandson. I did wonder if I was going to be happy here. And it didn't take me long to tell that. Before the flood, the community had started to change. But after that flood, it really started to change. I can tell you, when I was a kid, and you told me there were going to be sculptures all over town of these herons, I said, no way.
Right.
But look what's happening. All the interesting culture, art.
There's a new commitment to arts and a cultural voice throughout the parish, and honoring a diversity of voices. Yeah, I think
Right, and to me, I see the blend of that and the business community.
Yeah.
There's a blend happening there that's, I'm not going to say it's unique. You might can say it's unique.
Yeah.
I believe it to be unique, where they're both complementing each other. We need these artists to be successful,
Right.
because every time they give an interview, they're going to get asked where you're from and
right.
talk about it. We need them to do well. So that blend is a good thing. So completely new political landscape. Now, back to the data, infrastructure. So one of the things that we had after the 2016 flood that we didn't have in the 82-83 flood, the 91 flood, the 78 flash flood, and I could go on and on and on. And you couldn't compare the 2016 flood to 27 or 32 because we were a completely different community.
Right.
We weren't developed like we were. But one of the things is we had the advantage of technology that we didn't have for those other floods. We knew more about us in the 16 flood than ever before. We went into that flood knowing more about us. Now, the city of Monroe has some GIS capacity. The city of West Monroe has some GIS capacity. Police jury has some GIS capacity. And then their engineering firms have some GIS capacity. And they're all working together. So one of the things that my experience, having been on the road for about 10 years, working disasters around the country, I was very accustomed to pulling these different data sets together and to finding answers. Now, when we say GIS, it is mapping technology, but a lot of times you're not after the production of a map. You're
Right.
looking for an answer.
Right.
So we'll give you an example, whether it's a flood or the Easter Sunday tornadoes a few
Right.
years ago. The first question is what, where, how many, and how much. And it's always an estimate, and each day your data gets better. So in practice, in the work that I do, that's the first question I usually answer, and that's what the first questions were in the 2016 flood. So we went into 16 flood with that technology. So not only were we able to do the analysis and give the numerical answers on populations, numbers of businesses, and that sort of thing. But we were able to take advantage of the web-based products. So now, in the old days, I would have given you a paper map that would have been outdated as soon as you left the office.
Sure.
But now I'm going to deploy an interactive product where you can see it, the updates get made, and they update with you real time.
Right.
That's how we operate
And
now.
everybody at every level has that information, and they're always current. As current as the data is.
You're doing a conference call. You got 5 people in 5 different locations on the call. They're at their laptops,
Right.
and you're looking at it.
Right.
That's the way it was intended to be
So
used.
how is that influencing now major projects like on Black Bayou, Virgin Canals, and all that?
Black Bayou, West Monroe, the acquisitions they're doing in West Monroe, Raccoon Bayou out in the parish, Oregon Trail, a new project that the city of Monroe has, a Pine Bayou Zoo Branch project. So here's what's going on. The engineers have their engineering work they do on the drainage studies. What I'm doing is I'm taking flood insurance claims, historical flood insurance claims. I'm taking during the 2016 flood, a lot of residents took advantage of the FEMA assistance, individual assistance, call 1-800-FEMA. I'm taking that data set, I'm taking the 211 data set, and I'm taking the 911 data set. And I'm going into these what we call project service areas. The engineers say, this is the area that our project will provide relief to. And what I do is I go in and I look at all these factors that I just named off, in addition to structures, square footages of structures, and I'm pushing that out into a report. Matter of fact, I'm working on like 3 of those right now.
And that ultimately justifies that decision.
Well, that's right. What you're doing is several things, but one of them is your benefit cost analysis. What, where, how many, and how much.
Right.
We'll go back to that. So you saw Calypso was just approved. All these projects require those types of analysis.
And it seems like finally we're being humble enough to say we're never going to pump the water as fast as it falls out of the sky. So detention and making sure that we're being respectful of wetland areas to use their capacities is a whole new topic again.
You know what? I'm going to say that probably before the flood, the conversation on that has changed, but clearly after the flood it has. The Highland Trails Park over there has a retention area there. I've gone out there a number of times in the rain, stood there and took pictures and watched it work. Now that may sound silly, but if you do what I do and you want to see those projects work, that one works.
Well, it's beautiful because that water being there means somebody's house is not getting affected.
And it's natural. It's natural. There's no human intervention there.
Right.
It's natural. Right. Okay.
Because ultimately, all our flood water has to either matriculate through the ground or get into the river.
Well, that's right. You take the Greenway project over in West Monroe. That's something that they're still working on. They're giving the water room to expand and store and meter out. You know, your flood solutions are it's not one type of project. It's always a mix. And that's what you see going on across the community. These storage type projects, drainage type projects, pump type projects. It's a mix.
So in this current phase in your life, you're really an entrepreneur. You went out on your own, formed this company. If you reflect back 15 years to 15 years ago, Tom, what would you tell him now?
Oh gosh, I would say moderation in everything.
Okay.
I would say moderation in everything. I will say that I've never been afraid to take a calculated risk. Never been in business. It's a hard thing, but in terms of operating as a consulting firm, managing overhead, how you make all that work, cash flow, all the issues that small businesses deal with. A lot of the work I've done, I've been in close proximity to a lot of similar type businesses and learned from and listened. And I guess that's another thing, listening and learning from other people and how you do that. You know, and I'll tell you, one of the things I'll go ahead and bring up here, I think it's interesting. We've had several tornadoes the last few years. One of the things that I always do, including the Easter tornado that we spoke of earlier, is the first information I usually get is 2 points, where it touched down and where it lifted off. It's never a straight line, but that's what you get to work with and you get it estimated with. We usually create a polygon and we query that for businesses, homeowners, and so forth and so forth. okay, to produce the first reports. But it gets better. The National Weather Service goes in and creates their polygon of what the track actually was. Then you go back and run it again. Now you've got more real world. Now, one of the things that's been very interesting is when you get in these neighborhoods, you're starting to see LLCs pop up in these data sets. And I remember being at a meeting, that can't be right. Yes, it is. Our remote workforce is growing.
Yeah.
And that's what you see popping up in these data sets is somebody's got an office at home.
Yeah.
Which is very interesting because if you look at some of the things happening downtown, there's a whole lifestyle thing happening down there.
Right.
We've got Michael Eccles has the new apartments going in down there. So in my travels, whether it was the Gulf Coast or up in New Jersey and New York, the lifestyle is I'm going to live here, but I go have a good meal here, go get some nightlife there, go to a festival there, and it's all right here. But one of the things that we have in addition to all that, I can also go to the wildlife refuge, or I can also go to the river. So there's even more. So there's a lot going on with that.
Quality of life index here is enormous.
It has to be. Yeah. It just has to be. So there are a lot of people. Actually, when I was up in Hot Springs, Arkansas, I was in a condo working remote. I'd been on the road 10 years. I just finished the BP oil spill and said, guys, I need a break. So I go get a condo up in Hot Springs, Arkansas, and I'm working remote, so I program my work where I'm kayaking in the daytime and I'm working in the evening. And there's a lot of people out there that, as long as there's an airport close by. Now, that was the only problem I had. There's a small airport there in Hot Springs, but I had to go to Little Rock to go to D.C. or wherever I needed to go. But we have an airport. So I do believe in our community, we're ripe for remote workers, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, this has been extraordinary. What's your vision for the future insofar as using big data to help our community? What do you think is coming next?
I'll tell you a little bit about social media. So now in the software collection, in the data collection, we're able to mine social media. Now, if you're a social media user, you start saying, "Oh, wait a minute now, wait a minute." Well,
bad or ugly, it's
you got to uncheck that block where you put your geo reference, or somebody like me is going to get it and we can plot it.
Yeah.
And
for good things.
For good things. But there's been more than one company that got in trouble by the ACLU for how they were using that data. My uses are always post-event type.
Sure.
So Hurricane Sandy was one. Plotting that social media up the east as a storm came up the East Coast, seeing the responses of what homeowners were doing, what they were thinking about.
Just changeable impact.
That's exactly right. And I've had numerous examples where I've deployed similar software to watch North and South Korea. Yeah. And you think about that, you think, the first time in human history, somebody on our continent can watch how a person feels in North Korea under threat from their social media post. Spatially speaking.
Right.
But in terms of what's next, it is big data.
Yeah.
It is the continued finding ways to exploit that, find the business advantage.
Yeah.
It really is. But I'll tell you, a real handshake, a real conversation at the coffee shop, that'll never go away. That's just never going to go away. And as a matter of fact, I would say the last few weeks, I've intentionally started scheduling a few of my meetings at the local coffee shops just to change the environment a little bit. Had one this morning over at Corner Coffee in West Monroe.
Local plug. Well, thank you so much for joining us, giving us insight into both what you do, but how it's influencing the future of our community. Thank you for doing what you do in the background and giving voice to the engineers and also the politicians to make good decisions. And I don't know that that's necessarily celebrated, but we certainly appreciate it.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Mr.
Yeah. This has been another episode of Chamber Chats with our great friend Tom Malmay of Malmay and Associates. You can learn more about Malmay and Associates on our website. They're a member, or at westmonroechamber.org. Or if you want to be a member, give us a call at 325-1961. And we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Chamber Chats.